Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everyone. Welcome to Your Heart Magic. This is Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. And here we are for episode, I believe it's 12. So this week, the topic was Akashic Wildcard. That's what I announced last week. And the idea behind it was that I was going to open the Akashic Records on a topic that felt inspired and relevant to our lives right now at this time. So the records that I opened was for the year 2023. And that is our topic today. It is the Akashic Records on the year 2023. I figured what is more relevant than actually talking about the year that we are living in right now. And as individuals who are wanting to live more mindfully, more spiritually awakened, more aware of what's happening, just kind of more aware, conscientious individuals who are truly following our hearts and walking the path, it helps to have a sense of, well, what is happening collectively for all of us? There's multiple reasons that I like looking at collective energy. So a few things on this to just kind of orient all of us to where I'm coming from with this message. First of all, this is a collective message, and a collective message is different from an individual message, and that the guidance in general will feel relevant to most people who listen. Some of it might feel more relevant than others to you. I always say, take whatever resonates for your heart. Feel free to leave the rest. Certainly, there are individuals who will be going through their own stuff or their own timing. And so their individual timing and understanding of what's happening in their lives doesn't always necessarily sync up to the greater cycles. Usually it does, but every now and then we say, nope, it's summertime around me everywhere else, and I'm in a winter season. So just do you. Bring you to this information. Take what feels relevant for you. Take what feels pertinent to your path. And if it doesn't resonate with you, feel free to leave it and just know that it's not your message. This is a collective message, but I do find that it is helpful to look at things collectively, because when we are talking about living more intuitively and more cyclically, and living in tune with our hearts and our inner selves, our inner rhythms, and living in tune with the world around us, I think it's very relevant to look at what are some of the greater cycles that might be happening around us. I often talk about that the path to personal empowerment and soul sovereignty, feeling more of a sovereign individual, is to know ourselves so well and be our own experts that we are able to listen to our hearts, work our heart magic. That's what this is all about. And take the wisdom from our inner guidance and use that as our compass to inform how we interact with the world around us. So this podcast is all about tuning into your inner cycles. And I find it very instructive and helpful to know that as I'm tuning into my own inner cycles, what's happening in some of the bigger cycles around me? What's happening with the moon? What's happening with the new moon or the full moon or the quarter moon? What's happening with the planets? What is happening with the seasons? What is happening cosmically? What might be happening collectively? It's just looking at different channels and flows of information and looking at all of it and kind of asking, how does this apply to me personally? And what can I understand, is kind of my role in things right now from these bigger shifts that we're all going through. So that is why I love looking at collective energy. And one of the things that the Akashic Records does so beautifully is they take complicated spiritual concepts and they break it down in a very intelligent, applicable way that is quite practical for our day-to-day life. In the podcast, The Light of the Akashic Records, I believe that was week 4, I really dove into my understanding of the Akashic Records and how they speak to us and what information is contained in them. And I've always found that as somebody who works with the records, that who I am and how I understand knowledge, the records kind of interface with that. So there might be a piece here where my brain is very psychologically oriented, very analytical. And so the way I bring information through might be slightly different or very different than how somebody else does based on all of those cognitive constructs and my understanding. But across the board, when I have listened to others who teach on the records and who bring wisdom through, it seems like there's just this practicality about them, that this is not some high, lofty information that is above us. This is spiritual wisdom and guidance that we are meant to know at this time to appropriate and varying degrees based on what we're asking the question about, to help instruct us on how to live better, how to keep more of a higher perspective, and how to find perspective in our modern day world. So huge high five all around to the records for bringing this wisdom through. I have already transcribed what I channeled, because it's really not that much fun to listen to me dig around in the records. It's a little bit more clear if I go into it first and then create bullet points and talking points for you. But with that, let's dive into what they said about the year 2023. This year was called the Evolution of the Light. And that is a title I was given back in December of 2022 when I opened the records to bring through the message for the collective for January. And that was a theme. Every year, there's usually some kind of theme that they give me. And that is kind of this umbrella that we are working under. And it will be an evolving theme that we see throughout the year. And so I went into the records with that foreknowledge, not quite knowing what else might come through right now. And what I saw when I opened the records from my current vantage point, which is the second quarter of 2023, I opened them right before April of this year, is I opened with this image of a bunch of birds, and they were migrating across the sky together. And there was a big storm behind them, and they beat the storm. They had instinctively known how to fly in the right direction to not get caught in whatever storm was coming their way. And as that image was presenting itself to me, I saw the words and heard them very clearly: leave behind what is no longer serving you. And the message that I received from the records is that for so many of us, we have left behind what is no longer serving us. That has been the theme of many of our lives for the last few years, actually. And for some of you, this might go back to the last 5, 6, 7 years. But the record said that there are those who will listen to this podcast who have left marriages. You've left jobs. You have moved. You've changed homes. You have shifted your identity in some way where you once understood yourself this way, and now you understand yourself a different way. And whether that is through a certain label, a belief system. This might be somebody who literally is going through a transition in gender, who's transgender. They gave me multiple examples of ways that identity shifts and said that this will be entirely individual based on who you are and what your soul path is. But collectively, there are many who would identify with the theme: you've left behind what is no longer serving you. And you built a bridge. Especially in the year 2022. That was the building bridge year. That's what the records called it, the year where we built the bridge. You built a bridge to sort of travel into this new space. You escaped the storm being the old stuff that you just weren't meant to carry forward with you, the things that were not going to allow you to live your heartfelt path of authenticity, integrity in this world. And so you built this bridge, you migrated, and here you are in 2023. And the record said the stage has been set. A lot of space has been cleared. And the first quarter of 2023 was a bit of a final shakeoff of some of that energy. They said there'd been a lot of growing pains for many of us these first few months, and that those growing pains were a little bit like an adolescent who might shoot up over summer vacation. They leave seventh grade, I don't know, like 5 feet. And by the time they go into eighth grade, all of a sudden, they've grown 4 inches. And the records use this as a metaphor to say, even though it looks like that growth maybe happened overnight, the body and puberty and development and all of that has been preparing itself so that like when it did shoot up, like everything was ready to receive that. And so there was this idea that we've been burning off some old energy, shaking off some old stuff that doesn't fully resonate with us, continuing to align and recalibrate with this kind of new energy that we stepped into, and anything that's kind of the old ways of being. And some of this might have felt external, but some of this might have really felt internal, where many of us have been going through kind of running into an old belief or a limiting story that we told ourselves, or an old pattern in our life, and we kind of smack into it. And maybe it happens in something in the external world, but inside we say, this doesn't feel good to me. I have conflict around this. What is this about? And so we kind of do a little bit of cleanup work and say, well, I've really tried to step out of creating this kind of relationship or interacting in this way, or I've been working on my self-esteem, and I'm really trying not to fall into old self-talk. And so it's been an opportunity to kind of just shake some things off and do a little bit of cleanup work and let some of that old energy dust itself off. But here we are, the stage has been set, and we are in the year of the evolution of the light. And the record said that if the first few months of the year, the first quarter was this kind of growing pains and shaking off. And when I was opening the collective message for January, they actually called the first few months of the year, the first quarter, like a pilot episode. If you were to do a TV show, TV shows have this where they do a pilot episode where they're just trying out the characters. They put an episode together. If you've ever loved a favorite show and you pick it up around season 2, and now you're into season 3 and you just think, oh my gosh, like this show is so great. This happened a lot in sitcoms where you will just really fall in love with these characters and you're engaged and you love the story. And you were to go back somewhere around season 4 or 5 and you watch the very first episode, a lot of times we're like, this is awful. The characters aren't quite fully developed yet. The actors are still finding their voice. A lot of times there's still some kind of synergy that's taking place that kind of creates this future alchemy of whatever happens in these ensemble shows where the cast just clicks. And that was really the first few months of this year. We had the opportunity to try things out in a new way, to test out some new stuff in our lives, to kind of do these pilot studies where we just tried stuff out, and it was experimental, and we learned what we needed to learn and integrated those lessons. And as we move into April and beyond, what I feel is that what's really meant to happen this year is going to start to present itself to us. And we'll have a better sense of kind of the next step, the bigger picture. It felt like in April of this year, a giant veil was being lifted, or all of a sudden a lot more clarity was going to happen. And there's a sense of I'm seeing a window where it's fogged up and somebody's cleaning the fog so you can see more clearly. That feels a little bit like this year to me. The first few months, there was still a little bit of a fog and we were just trying to see our way through that. And now there's a lot more clarity coming in. And when the records call this year the evolution of the light, I specifically dug into, well, what does that mean? I love the sound of this. I think that is a beautiful catchphrase. When I heard that back in December, when I was doing this channeling, I got really excited, just BethAnne on an individual level. I was like, well, that sounds cool. It sounded a lot more fun to me than in December of 2021, when they said that 2022 was the year of building the bridge. I was like, it sounds like stuff is happening this year. And if you follow astrology and planetary transits, there are big things like going down right now, very rare occurrences that have been happening with some of the astrological transits. And I certainly think that there's many of us who might have different wisdom paths and different gateways to our understanding of the mysteries and spirit and how we feel called to bring this information through. But many of us are saying the same kinds of things, like stuff is going down in 2023. And whenever big change and big things are going on, we know that there can be struggle and challenge in that. We've been living with that. This is not new information, but it feels like there's so much space for beauty coming in and so much space for reinvention. And what the record said about this idea of the evolution of the light was basically, yes, your planet is going through some big shifts in the light right now. Like the light, in more of an ethereal, energetic way, is evolving in some shape or form. And I don't quite understand how. I didn't dig into that. But let's just know that something is happening in more of a cosmic way with that energy. And they referenced some of the big astrological transits and acknowledged them and said that is supporting some of this more immaterial evolution of the light. And the planet itself, the souls that comprise the being that is Mother Earth, that is how the records phrased it. She is basically doing what she needs to do to continue to evolve herself. The Earth is going through shifts and going through planetary and environmental shifts. And that is another way that the light is evolving, on this planet that we're all living on. But the take-home message that I was given to share with the listeners of this podcast for this particular transmission from the Akashic Records was that they want you to know that you are the light that is also evolving at this time. The light that is in you, the light that is in your heart, the light that is your inner self, your soul, your connection to however you understand source or the mysteries or the divine, that spark inside of you, that light and that authenticity and that soulful part of yourself that is inside of you, that's what's evolving right now. And it is working in relationship with these other cycles going on in the planets, we'll say the cosmos, more like the ethereal light, from kind of what's above us, and then the light below us that we're standing on this planet. You are working in relationship to all of that. And that was really the emphasis. We are the ones evolving at this time. And as we evolve and we change and we become a higher expression than we were before, as we leave an old incarnation of self, that's basically what evolution is. And I fell down a scientific rabbit hole looking up what causes evolution and decided that information didn't feel relevant for this podcast. That's not my background. I'm a psychologist, not a biologist. But my understanding is that there's many factors that cause evolution to happen. But in essence, the records are talking about the kind of evolution where this natural development was either meant to happen. This transformation and transmutation was meant to happen at that time, or where something is going on in the environment that the evolution becomes a forced adaptation, that something new has been introduced, that an organism or a system or an old way of being needs to evolve, it needs to develop, it needs to grow into some new form other than its previous incarnation in order to meet the demands, to meet the new factor that has come in and work with it. And so that's what we've been doing. That's what all this change has been about. We have been on a soul level and an inner level and who we are as people. We have been evolving, and we have been working with all the craziness in our world going on right now, all the stuff that makes us look at the news cycle and say, what is happening out there? We have been working with all of that, and we've been adapting to all of that. And the records specifically talked about the pandemic as a time where we really started to see this mass shift, because at that time, things on a mass level began to change in a way that we all understood as different. For better or for worse, whether we like the change or not, change was upon us. And many of these systems that we're still seeing in flux, and by systems, they mean like the bigger systems, the economic system, our political systems, our government systems, our environmental systems, many of those systems that are still in flux at that time needed to be re-examined and re-looked at. A lot of change began to happen in those bigger systems that have kind of created the structure that we've understood our world as a forced adaptation. And so this change has been going on for a while. And here we are being the light in the middle of it and learning to shift with that. So what does all that mean for us? Well, I broke this down into a few major themes where I asked the record specifically about some kind of overarching ideas of like, how might this show up? Or like, what about this big topic? And again, these are collective general ideas around bigger systems like the economy, a little bit of stuff politically, talking about our interpersonal relationships. I tapped into some different categories that I thought might be of interest to us. So none of this is specific. This is bigger picture stuff and perspective of when we're looking at the headlines and we say, my gosh, what is happening here? Has the world gone mad? And we want to fall sometimes into the space of hopelessness, because sometimes it does look like madness has taken over, and it's very easy to get discouraged at the amount of harm that humans are doing to one another, at the amount of harm that's being done to the environment, at the amount of oppression that might be happening in some of the bigger systems, and the amount of really kind of seeing voices in power maybe maintain power and create structures to help them maintain power, while people who are not in a power position are really struggling. Those things really get us down. They get us down on a human level. It's not bad to feel sad about those things. It's not bad. It's not spiritual to have a sense of heaviness or sadness about those things. But a collective perspective does give us a higher sense of, well, what might be happening with this? And just as we might not judge a movie or a book halfway through, like if we only watched a beloved book, if we only read it halfway through and we didn't know there was more, and, we believed that the book ended at the midpoint, where maybe it has something to do with a hero or heroine, and she has journeyed somewhere to, go learn her superpowers. And we'll kind of go with Joseph Campbell's The Hero Journey here. And so she's gone to figure out and reclaim her like higher voice and her bigger self. And, part of the story, she's going to have to go back and she's going to have to face her nemesis at some point, or face down her old fears in some way, and show that she's evolved and she's integrated these powers and she now has found her way through. Well, what if the story only ended where the kind of old, we'll say the arch nemesis, the bad whoever, the bad archetype was still in power, and it looked like our heroine was struggling and not going to make it, and it was like the end, the story's over. Let's just imagine that we don't have the second half of the book, and we don't know, nobody's finished the story, we don't know what's going to happen, so we just think it ends on this note of massive discouragement, and basically like the bad system wins and, good fails once again as evil triumphs. That's kind of the archetype of those kinds of stories is sort of this light versus darkness archetype. And we just didn't know there was more to the story. And that is really what we're being encouraged to keep in mind right now when we look at what's happening in our world is the story's not written yet. It's writing itself as it goes. The light is evolving as it goes. We are evolving as it goes. We are evolving. We are changing. We are shifting how we understand things in order to better respond to what we're seeing in our system. And so we need to remember that there is more that meets the eye to some of the stuff that we might see in a headline, and we can be sad and grieve and show up and do what we feel is appropriate for those given situations, but keeping that bigger perspective that the light is evolving, that there's a bigger story here writing itself is going to help us from sliding into a place of getting lost in the moment and discouraged and judging the entire outcome based on something that we're seeing in a given moment. So that's my pep talk for all of these collective themes. With that, let's dive into a couple of them. So some of the major themes that are coming through is the records did talk about the economy right now. And I'm just going to give a little bit of a brief couple snippets of this. First of all, they acknowledge that many who might be listening to this, you are feeling the strain. The records are always very compassionate. They're not these like detached scientific things that have no compassion for how it feels to be a human, and there was really this acknowledgement coming through of it's been hard for many people and a lot of compassion attached to that. But the bigger picture that they gave us that I really wanted to talk about is this overarching theme that right now there is a redefinition of significance going on, is what they called it. And they talked about this idea that collectively, meaning throughout the decades, throughout the centuries, as a collective group, humanity has slowly evolved to this place that we have created some of the structures that we have right now. So even if you didn't have a hand in it and you disagree with the way that healthcare or the government or a policy or economics is being done wherever you live in the world, it was the idea that there were these steps and these shifts that took place gradually over time that kind of got us to where we're at now. And that there's sort of been this agreement of, well, this is consensus reality. And that some of what we have placed significance in as a collective has to do with things like wealth, status, influence, fame, money, power, things that really represent very material, status-oriented things that are measures of success, where it shows in this sort of very material way that somehow somebody has garnered all this success. And they're a person who's noteworthy because they're listed as, one of the top whatever richest people in this country. And there has been this shift towards, this is kind of where we're at in terms of what we hold significant. Now, many of us, like for me personally, and I am imagining for the bulk of the people who will listen to this podcast, we disagree. We do not concur with that consensus reality. Many of us would look at that and say, I don't buy into that system. I think there is a better world that we could create. I think as light workers and healers and as the creatives and the artists and the people of faith and the seekers, that we are wanting to create more of a heart-based world that takes into account more of the collective and the needs of the collective versus just the wants and whims of a few. So many of us don't agree with how things have been set up. And here we find ourselves living in it anyways and kind of doing whatever work we're called to do to, be the change and all that in our corner and little slice of the world, whatever influence that we have. But the records really talked about the idea that the shift in significance is happening beyond just us, beyond just those who would identify with the kinds of things I might be talking about on this podcast. It's happening in people who would never listen to a podcast like this. They might not buy into anything metaphysical or have no use for it. But it doesn't mean that there are not hearts that are awakening and that there are not people who might be in a completely different orientation for how they see reality and a completely different interest and hobbies than what I might have, who are really making a shift and looking at like what is real, what is significant, what is value, like what is life. And that's really what we're seeing. There's a lot more people asking themselves questions like, what makes a good life? What brings me purpose? Economically, one of the things that they said is that the current state of being is kind of forcing a lot of consumers to become more conscientious and to really evaluate, how do we spend our money? What do we choose to invest in? To be more thoughtful about some of the choices that we might be making. And one of the things the records kept saying is that when it comes to these bigger systems of status and wealth and power, and they actually said influencers. And I saw this image in my head of the influencing trend that seems to be happening on a lot of social media sites where people are being paid to influence and, I don't know, wear a product or post it on their page. The records called that the sites that you value so much. That's how they put it to me, meaning all of us. The sites that so many value. And we use this idea of numbers or followers or these sort of false measures of significance to have a sense of, wow, this person's having some influence. And so they even tapped into that, and said that a lot of people are really stopping to question those things, really starting to ask the question of how did we get here? And what does it really mean to be a person of influence? And they kept saying, like, the system's going to do what the system is going to do. Influencers are going to do what influencers are going to do. People in power, not all of them, but many of them as a collective, it's going to do what it's going to do. There's always going to be a push for more, for bigger, for better, for an upgrade, for something on kind of gaining, whether it's money, followers, sales, whatever it is, there's always going to be a push for that. And if you challenge the system directly and, kind of go against it directly, there's sort of this rage against the machine, and it feels kind of like this unstoppable juggernaut that you can't have an effect in, and the records really took it to this place of the way that systems are changed really begins in the hearts of the people who choose to buy into it. And so it begins in us as conscientious citizens and consumers and humans, where we are guided to think about what we invest in, what we give our attention to, how we spend our money, who we might choose to give our money to. If we're going to buy something, do we buy from over here? Where they're mass producing things, do we buy from over here? And my qualifier for that is we have hard choices to make. The records did not say this in any kind of a way where there was a expectation that this is how you should choose. And if you're not choosing this, you're not spiritual. That's not it at all. So if this feels at all dogmatic, let's just kind of check that and push it aside. This is really about us having to weigh sometimes some hard choices. Sometimes we'd like to be able to be more of a conscious consumer, and we only have so much to go around. Like somebody who has children to feed might not be able to make some of the choices that they'd like to make. So this isn't about resolving all of this or doing it perfectly. This podcast is not about perfection. It is about exploring the evolution of this new way of being and how we can slowly take steps to bring that into our lives in a way that feels practical, doable, and applicable. If it feels like a should, it's probably a shouldn't, So this is really just about the record saying that we're exploring these questions and we're asking ourselves hard questions and kind of balancing out these tough energies and saying to ourselves, well, I want to be more conscientious, and I've only got X amount to go around. But this evaluation process is where change happens. And that's really the take-home message for a lot of this. They talked about the idea that we're not going to make all these old systems crumble and resurrect them entirely. That sometimes it's not in the best interest of the collective to come in and rip something out entirely and kind of resurrect something entirely new in its place. That sometimes evolution means taking parts of the old that can still remain intact and evolving into a new way of being that better serves things. So as we ask ourselves these questions, there is kind of this mass shift that's happening in consciousness around ideas having to do with how we spend our money, how we understand significance, how we want to live our life. And many of us who would already be listening to these words and speaking these words, we're dialed into this already. But again, the emphasis was on the fact that these are people who would never listen to this podcast that they're talking about. This is a mass thing happening. This is somebody who is a CEO and is tired of the rat race, is tired of feeling a sense of a lack of integrity in the business that they're in. And so they decide to maybe either start a new business, revamp their company. They might chuck it entirely and move somewhere and do something completely different. This might be the farmer who is tired of farming practices that they feel do not serve the earth around them. And let's say they truly love the land, but they're also trying to make their living. And so they need to work on evolving their practices and kind of taking into consideration, how can I still feed my family, but try and do things in a way that feels more sustainable? These are the kinds of questions that are being asked right now on a mass level. And recently in one of the podcasts, I think it was kind of how do we deal with some of the stuff coming at us in this modern day age and find perspective. One of the things that the record says was, you don't have to be so quick to figure out your position on something. These issues are hard. We grapple with them for a reason. They're like grapple worthy. They're not issues that we're somehow supposed to like reflect on for 30 minutes and come up with some solution to solve the problems of the world. Putting together a position statement on some of the social issues or environmental issues or big things coming our way and drafting it and saying, well, this is what I believe. And now it's kind of this immutable thing. This is my stance. We're meant to grapple with those things. So it's okay if we are working on figuring out, well, how do I feel about this? That is how the light is evolving. That is how we're forced to find some new way of being, is through the grappling. Without that friction and out that creative tension and without that chaos, evolution can't really take place. Metamorphosis really can't take place. It's not an overnight thing where you wake up one day and all of a sudden you have it figured out. There is this friction process that happens in order for transformation to happen. So we're meant to grapple. So when you look at the world and you say, what is going on? I don't know what to think about all this. Well, congratulations. You're not supposed to know what to think about all this. You're supposed to think about, well, what pieces feel most relevant to me in my world? Where do I maybe feel called to have a voice or to support in some way, or my heart is just really with what's going on over here, and I don't know exactly how I feel about that. I want more information, or I'm just going to be in the tension of it. Like, that's really what we're working with right now, is just making some space and having peace with some of that. Systems can't always fall apart entirely so that they can come back together. Sometimes they do, but sometimes things have to evolve within their current state because it does not serve the greater good. And that was this beautiful metaphor that the records gave. And they said, well, let's pretend we're just going to come up with a fictional town. We can call it Happy Dale. I actually did a project on Happy Dale back in my English class when I was a junior in high school. I don't even remember what it was for, but I remember drawing a map and I had like Joy Town, Glee City, and I called this fictional kind of country or town Happy Dale. And let's say that the residents of Happy Dale are not all that happy with one another, that there is some kind of divide between the two of them. We'll say it's a political divide. And, one side is like, I only believe in yellow, the yellow party. And the other side is like, no, the pink party is where it's at. And they can't see eye to eye and they get more and more angry at each other. And, so the yellow party supporters and yellow party people all decide, we're done with Happy Dale. We're going to go somewhere else and we're going to go establish a new place to be. We're going to go live in Pleasantville over here. And they go and they need to build this new town in this new city. And they're really excited about this, right? Because now they're just with like-minded people and everybody kind of thinks the same way. And they all have the same values and the same ideologies. And it's just great for all of them. And they get there and they realize that there is a problem in their plan. All the people who know how to build structures were part of the pink party and they have remained behind in Happy Dale. And there's nobody in this new space that actually knows how to build a roof. They don't know how to build a house. They don't know how to build shelter. They're really good at other things. They're good communicators. Maybe they're really good cooks. So they got the food part covered, but nobody's particularly good at knowing how to build. And so they realized that they actually needed people in the pink party back in Happy Dale in order to create a thriving system where everybody was able to use their gifts. Okay, that is such a silly metaphor, though it made me smile coming up with Happy Dale and revisiting that little chapter of my past. But, that was really the idea in the records, is that we're not leaving people behind. This isn't about you believe this way, and so you're just all going to go over here and believe what you want and be surrounded by all those people and leave everybody else behind. There's always going to be some people that we say, really? I'm on the planet with them? Are you sure we're cut from the same cloth? We'll call them the anomalies. You have your own ideas of who those are in your world, but there's, for the most part, most people are evolving to a space of realizing interdependence. We need each other. And, part of moving forward together is being able to see that there's more room for everybody's voices. And one of the things that they did address was politics in a very, very general way. Speaking in specifics will never be something that I do on this show. I am not interested in that. I am only interested in dialogues that bring us together. But what the record said is that more and more, many of us are looking around and we're seeing these divisions. And we're seeing where we might have once identified with, well, I'm a this and I'm a this. And there's just a lot more questioning going on where people say, well, I believe in the values that this represents, but I don't like how this might be going down. And maybe I see corruption or I see something that's not right in this system. And that there's almost this obviousness right now happening with some of the divisions in our world and some of the hatred going on, that it's so exaggerated that most people who are really conscious minded and just really trying to stay aware are kind of looking at that being like, well, this hatred, this dissent, this doesn't feel like the direction this is meant to go. And so there's just been a lot of shifting, even around how we understand ourselves politically, how we might understand belief systems, other beliefs that we have that we tend to hold to very strongly as part of our identity. And that too is meant to shift at this time, because the only way something changes in a system is when people kind of put their power together and say, I no longer am interested in supporting this. And I want something different. And I'm willing to move my energy and move my efforts in a direction of different. So that's sort of an overview of what we're seeing. And there is a lot of chaos that is happening in that. And that was kind of the take-home guidance when I said, okay, this is all the stuff that's happening. What do you want us to know on how to live well in the middle of all this? And they said, don't be so quick to think you have to create equilibrium in something that feels chaotic or messy. Don't rush in and think you have to bring balance into something in your life if it's not ready to be brought into balance yet. And they gave a little bit of a caution around the idea of balance, that yes, it is certainly worthy to strive for finding inner peace inside of ourselves. And we do that through learning to create peace regardless of what's shifting externally. We do that through learning to create stability inside of us. But from the records perspective, they said it's almost better to just let yourself have, like, if something big is going down in your life, just be emotionally dysregulated about it. It's okay to be upset. You can come back to inner peace when the time is right, but don't try and force yourself to get there if circumstances and you are not ready for it yet, because sometimes we shortcut really important growth. And they gave this metaphor of, what if you are walking along and you see this sweet little caterpillar, it's on a tree, and there's all this sticky stuff that you see it kind of stuck in, and you don't know what you're looking at. And you say, oh my gosh, that poor sweet caterpillar, it looks like a spider's web. It's stuck in a web. I got to get them out. I got to set them free. That's really sad. The spider's going to come back and it's going to eat them, and they're trapped. And what if you free this caterpillar and then go about your merry way, and you didn't realize that caterpillar was actually not trapped in a spider's web. It was spinning its cocoon. That's why it looked sticky. It was about to go through a natural state of metamorphosis, and it was going to turn into a butterfly. And you've just now prevented that growth from happening through your good intentions because you wanted to fix things and rush in the moment. And it's this metaphor for recognizing when our life is sort of going through this cocoon spinning. And no matter how much we're trying to restore order, it's just a little premature. And so there is a balance between embracing chaos and calm. There's a balance between embracing stagnancy and movement. And there is growth that happens in that tension, in that friction. And let's not shortcut that growth. And that was sort of this beautiful image that this message ended on, as I came back to these birds who were migrating and they were flying away from the storm and taking themselves to safety. And the record said those birds did not need somebody to come along and tell them, there's a storm coming, you need to get to safety. Here's a map. If you go over here, it's going to be better sky for you. And here's some branches that you can all hang out in where it's going to be safe. They're following their instincts. They're following what they know to do. And that is really the admonition for us, is that if we can get out of the mental stories we're telling ourselves, and we can let things be a little bit messy, and we can let the world be a little bit messy, let our lives be a little bit messy, not try and superimpose a meaning or a fix on it if it's just not ready. And we can just relax a little bit and relax the story and just kind of loosen our attachment to, well, it has to look like this. I have to get it back on track, and let it be what it is. That instinct and that intuitive knowing and that guidance from spirit, from nature, from something bigger that's already in us as a divine soul embodying a human journey, is going to take over, and it's going to help us find our way through. And that's really what our heart magic is about, because our heart is what helps connect us to that wisdom. It's what helps us get out of the mental stories of the mind and loosen the attachment to that, and really connect to, well, what do my instincts say? What does my intuition say? What does my heart say? What might spirit say? And we can trust that. We can trust that. I could speak about this forever, but it's time to wrap this up for this week. And I will probably open the records on 2023 again at some point within the year and see where things are at. But this feels like such a nice guidance, at least to me. And I hope it did for you, to help orient us to just kind of where we're at right now and how we can find some perspective as spiritual beings. on a human path. By the way, the record said that the human path of authenticity and integrity is the spiritual path. Just a little fun aside, I said something about the spiritual path in there, and they were like, no. The spiritual path is the human path. It is when we're trying to shift into our authenticity and integrity, regardless of what you believe spiritually. I thought that was really beautiful. So if nothing else, as long as you keep choosing the path of authenticity, like you are on the path. All right. Next week's topic, inspired by this week's message. It is going to be redefining significance. Since the record said that we are shifting our idea around what significance is. And I think for many of us, significance brings up on a very personal level, issues related to worth, purpose, why am I here? Am I having an impact? All of that. We're going to dive into redefining significance and look at how we can rethink some of those concepts in a way that feels supportive for us and in a way that support our light and our beautiful greatness and our authenticity, and a way that empowers all of that. So that will be coming up next week on Your Heart Magic. And until then, have a beautiful week. Be well, be you, be love, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your light.